this video, I designed a LEGO driving simulator. This all started a year ago with a racing game, but instead of just remaking the exact same thing, I made something much better. I started by finding the right amount of treads I needed to use to fit the 32x32 base plate. Then by adding these Technic pins into the treads, I can clip on these long plates, which give me a perfect platform to build the road. But for this to be a true driving simulator, I need to add cars on the road that you have to dodge and weave between. So I made 5 brightly colored cars to go on the road and added a bunch of black tiles to make everything smooth for your car to ride over. That was basically it for the actual road, or so I thought, so I moved on to making this actually playable. In order for this to work, the frame holding up the road needs to be on some plates instead of top these smooth tiles. That way when I hook up the battery box, if you hit a car, it pushes the whole thing back and shuts off the power to the motor. There's a lot of trial and error involved in finding the right size of frame to hold the road in place. But once I got something working, I hooked it up to the motor, but obviously without any gears involved, the motor spins way too fast, so I need to gear it down to make it much slower so that the game is actually even possible to play. I geared it down enough and then gave it a test run to make sure everything was working, but we have a huge problem. The way the treads are made doesn't actually have a full-length hole for the pins holding the road on to go into, and they actually slide out a little bit, and when they come back on top, all the individual pieces are all in different heights and angles. Plus, I only have 2 days to finish this model, so I really need to get a move on. The problem with the treads means I have to go back and redo every single chunk, so I have to take out every single one of these pins, add in all of these black ones, then take a bunch of Technic beams and place them atop the treads. Then I can put on the blue and gray pins back in the beams and clip on the road yet again. But that's not the only problem. Because of how much thickness I just added to the road to make it stronger, it no longer fits at the height I set the frame to hold the road. So I need to go back and lift the frame up even higher to make it all work. And with all that in place, now I need to add the on and off mechanism to this build. By putting this battery box next to the tread structure and linking it up, I can push the on switch forward and everything starts spinning. But if I hit something, it pushes the switch back, making the machine shut off. But it's kind of hard to press, so I switched it out for a looser switch so that it shuts off easier. Now I can place this little stopper here so that it doesn't push it too far, and with that done, I now need to build a steering system for the car. This part took a lot of big brain thinking, and I lost some brain cells during the process, so if you could just hit that sub button, it would really mean a lot. My first idea was to copy my original design by having the steering wheel on an angle and using Technic beams underneath to push the car to the left and right. But there were 2 things about this mechanism I don't like. 1, it's too floppy and loose, and 2, it puts the car at a slight angle when you turn in either direction. But after testing it, it was so loose that it would just run right over the cars, and considering my goal was not to make an unlosable game, I'm gonna have to go back to the drawing board. And by hooking my car to them, I can connect them to the steering wheel with this small gear that rests just below the gear rack, so that when I turn the steering wheel, the car goes side to side. Then I built a slot for the rack to slide in and covered it all over with bricks to lock it in place so that it doesn't have any way of disengaging with the gear. Then I made it all look good with some tiles and slopes. At this point in the building process, I hadn't decided to make it a driving simulator yet, and was still just making a racing game, so I decided to make one of those cool steering wheels that some race cars have. But halfway through, I decided to test it out, and I'm glad I did because it definitely was not going to work. The ratio of the gear to gear rack inside the steering system is small enough that you have to turn the wheel pretty far in order to go all the way to the left or right. So when I put the race car steering wheel on, it has to be turned almost upside down in order to make a full movement on the car, and that's just not easy to use. So I decided just to use the wheel I was using before, and added a small octane tile at the center for details. I topped it off with a few car-like details like adding this mini windshield, and finally every mechanical bit of this build was done, so now all I had to do was make it look good. Or so I thought, until after building up the entire back and side walls, I realized I had forgotten to make an on button to make the game start, so I took part of the back wall down and added a small button into the back. Then I finally got to work making the top of the game look good. I wanted sidewalks and a parkway on either side, so I got to work, but after putting all the dark gray edging and green plates in place, I finally got the idea to make this a driving simulator. So I decided to take a leaf out of my Flight Simulators book and use this remote control to make it so you can change the speed that you drive. I opened the top and back up and added this infrared receiver so that the controller could connect easily to the battery box, and then gave it a test run. Unfortunately for me, it wasn't going to be that easy. I had forgotten that the controller I was using didn't control speed, but only changed the direction that the motor spins out, which isn't useful at all. So I went to my box of mechanical pieces and got out my other controller. This one I know controls speed, so I spent some time working out where I wanted it, and of course decided on a place that required me to take apart part of the wall yet again. Then once I had hooked it to the wall sideways, I began making a joystick to act as the gas pedal. To make it spring back into a set position, I added a little black bar out to the side to stop it and a rubber band, but of course it wouldn't be that easy. The controller I'm using does not have a set resting position like the original remote I used. There's a red button that stops all movement, but that resets the resting position of the controller, so if that dial doesn't go to the exact same spot, it could end up not stopping at the resting position, or even going backwards. I tried making a little attachment that hits the off button on the controller when you put the joystick back into resting position, but the button was too low profile to get it to hit consistently. Instead, I made a makeshift button you can press to hit the off button and reset the motor to no speed. That way, if the tread is still moving when the accelerator is in resting position, it can get turned off easily. And finally, after hours of work, all the mechanical and difficult parts of this build were done, for real this time. So to make the game look good, I built a bridge over the top of the back end of the road to help hide the way the cars come out of the ground. And on the other side, I added a black tunnel to hide the ugly mechanisms. Then I added a sidewalk on either side of the road and some street lamps, which for some reason really made it look way better, but nothing compared to the finished model. To the grassy area, I put a curving little walkway with some park benches and some small tree designs which really just complete the look of the build. And with everything in place and working, it was time to try the machine out. If I hit the little button on the back here, you can see it pushes the road forward, which engages the battery box. Then with one hand I can pull down the accelerator, and with the other I can steer. So that was pretty easy, so I'm going to add more obstacles to make it a little bit harder. So I took off the steering column and the tread structure and then started building cars. I ended up building 6 in a bunch of different colors, then added them all back onto the road so that it was harder and you had to weave through a lot more to actually beat the game, or just to survive in general, and then I put it back on and tested it yet again. So that turned out really hard, but as the final hurrah, I'm going to go full speed and not hold back and see how long it can last. This game was really fun to make, and honestly, it's just super satisfying to play, so if you enjoyed the video, please do consider subscribing and liking. And for any of you who made it this far,